Okay, we're going to look at a food chain. That food chain is going to start with an oak tree. Okay, so we're going to start with an oak tree, and we're going to draw an arrow to show that on that oak tree we've got some caterpillars feeding on the leaves of the oak tree. And there's a bird called a blue tit which eats the caterpillars, and then another bird feeds on the blue tit, and that's a tawny. Actually, we're going to change. We're not going to have a tawny owl because it's not very realistic. We're going to have a sparrowhawk. Sparrowhawk is a bird of prey that feeds on small birds, and then we're going to have on that sparrowhawk, unfortunately it's got some bird lice. Okay, and the bird lice are parasites that are feeding on that sparrowhawk. So this is a food chain, okay, and that food chain represents a flow of energy. So these arrows here, they represent flows, or maybe we should say transfers of energy. Okay, now where does that oak tree get its energy from? Well, we never put this in our food chain because that's not the convention, but the oak tree gets its energy from solar radiation, and that solar radiation is providing energy for the oak tree to photosynthesize. So there's photosynthesis going on in this oak tree, and the oak tree is what we call a producer. Okay, it's a plant, it's making its own food. It's called an autotroph. That's another word for a producer. Auto means self, and troph means feeding, so it's making its own food. Okay, now what do we know about photosynthesis? I have a greener colour now. We know that photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide plus water, and then that solar radiation happens to help convert those molecules into glucose, and I'm going to use the chemical formula for glucose. But what we've been talking about in class is that this glucose, and we should add that it also produces oxygen, so this glucose is what we know as biomass. Okay, it's the biological material, it's the biological matter of all organisms. Okay, so let's think about what's happening here. So this process is really important. You can relate this back to the carbon cycle. Remember, the carbon cycle is showing the flow of carbon in the world, but here we're just looking at one ecosystem. Okay, this ecosystem in our case is a woodland in Northern Europe. Okay, so we've got now our biomass in the oak tree, and these caterpillars are feeding. Remember, the arrow is pointing in the direction of that energy flow, and now we're looking at the caterpillars. And this is the second trophic level. Okay? You can also say that these caterpillars are the first consumer. They're the first things to consume something else. The oak tree, see where we can write this, the oak tree is the first trophic level. Okay? Now, what's happening here is that we've got the biomass moving from one trophic level to another trophic level. But at every trophic level, there's a loss of energy. And we're going to represent that here. This is a loss of energy. We're going to say that, so there's a loss of energy when the energy moves from the first trophic level to the second trophic level. In fact, 90% of the energy is lost, and only 10% is transferred. And we can remember this because we call it the rule of 10. Let's see what we can do here. We call it the rule of 10. Very important. Only 10% of energy is transferred. Okay. Now we need to understand, go for a nice bright colour here, why is all that energy lost? Okay, well, we've got the first and second law of thermodynamics. Now maybe it's a good point to remind ourselves that this transfer of energy, this point here, this one here, and this one, and this one, and this one, these transfers are all representing the first law of thermodynamics. Okay, and we need to remember that the first law of thermodynamics is all about the fact that energy cannot be created, it can only be transferred in energy conversions, we can call them. Okay, so these points in our food chain, we've got here and here and here, these are all representing this first law of thermodynamics. If you remember here, we were talking about this transfer of energy in the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics says that, I need to go back to a pen, I think. The second law of thermodynamics is is all about a term called entropy. And entropy is a measure of disorganized energy. And so if you get an increase in entropy, or you lose energy in the form of heat, that energy isn't useful anymore in the food chain. So we need to ask the question here, what's causing that heat? And the answer is respiration. Okay? That's one of the reasons why we don't get much energy transferring between trophic levels, because all organisms respire. That's plants and animals, remember? Plants and animals. Remember, that's important for your carbon cycle as well. So you've got all organisms respiring, and respiring means that they are converting biomass into energy that they can use. So in this case, actually what's happening is that biomass, that C6H12O6 glucose, with the addition of oxygen, goes back to carbon dioxide and water. So it's come full circle. And so carbon dioxide's given off in respiration by plants and animals. Remember, plants and animals. Okay? So that's one reason why you've got this loss of energy. But in feeding is often messy. Okay? If you think about your plate of food, you might not eat all the food on your plate. You might eat it all, but say I'm using this as a metaphor and you don't eat all the food, so you're already losing some energy. Okay? But imagine what have we got? A caterpillar eating the oak tree. It's not eating the whole oak tree. It doesn't eat all of the organism. So there's wastage there. It's not transferring all of the energy from one trophic level to the next trophic level. Okay? So let's try and zoom in a little bit on these different trophic levels. So we've already identified that we've got an oak tree, that's our first trophic level. The caterpillars is our second trophic level. The blue tit is the third trophic level. I'm just going to abbreviate now. The sparrowhawk is the fourth trophic level, and unusually in this food chain we actually have a fifth trophic level. That's really rare to have that many trophic levels because of the second law of thermodynamics. So much energy is lost. Okay? Now, what else can we think about this food chain? At every point on this food chain, things are dying. Yes, and unfortunately everything comes to an end. And we have them ending up in what's called a decomposer food chain, which is the amazing world of economy in ecological systems, that everything eventually is recycled in some way. Now, we've covered a lot of information there in a short amount of time, but we're going to take a minute to take this food chain apart in another way. We're going to think about it in a graphical way, and we're going to say that we've got I think we're going to change to a thicker colour to this, and we're going to draw an ecological pyramid. So we've got this oak tree here on our first trophic level, and we can represent the number of caterpillars that are enormous, that feed on an oak tree. And then we've got these blue ticks that are feeding on the caterpillars. We've got the sparrowhawk feeding on the blue ticks, and then we've got an unusual situation that we've got some bird lice, parasites, and there can be a lot of bird lice on one sparrowhawk, feeding on this sparrowhawk. And this ecological pyramid is called a pyramid of numbers. And you can have normal shaped pyramids, but you can also have these unusual shapes of pyramid where they don't actually look like a pyramid. Okay, now if we look at another type of pyramid for the same food chain, then what we can do is we can look at a pyramid of biomass. And for this one, if we look at the pyramid of biomass, it's going to be much more of a normal pyramid shape, because the biomass of an oak tree is actually enormous, and it's far greater than the mass of caterpillars on the oak tree, and indeed of the blue ticks and the sparrowhawk and the bird lice. So in this case, the sparrowhawk and the bird lice. Okay, now in this case what we've got is a traditional, a standard shape, and this is the pyramid. Oops, I've spelled that wrong. I'll just correct that. So we've got a pyramid of biomass. Okay. Now, in this pyramid of biomass, we're representing the amount of biological matter at each trophic level. Remember, these bars represent the biomass. And what we need to remember is that this biomass is recorded at one moment in time. So say it's over 1 year, okay, for a given system. Now we can even do the same where we look at a pyramid of energy, and we were able to measure the energy in biomass when we did those burning experiments. And just like in this case, the pyramid of biomass, you'll have a pyramid shape, okay, where you've got kilojoules per meter squared, for example. Okay, so that's a normal situation. Okay, and these are just graphical representations of an ecosystem. Okay, and they're useful for us to be able to compare different ecosystems. Now, remember the reason why the energy at each trophic level is less is that second law of thermodynamics. And that's really important. Thermodynamics. Okay? That's really important for us to remember that. Okay? The pyramid of numbers helps us to also think about what we're going to move on to next, where we're going to look at some of the consequences of what we've just been looking at. And we're looking at, well, it's not very good, is it? Let's try this one, darker. We're going to look at bioaccumulation to start with. Okay, so let's think about that poor bird of prey. Okay, the poor bird of prey, the sparrowhawk, is on the first, second, third, it's on the fourth trophic level. Okay, so imagine that sparrowhawk might be eating, I don't know, let's make a number up, 3 blue tits per day. Okay, but the blue tits, they're eating, let's make another number up, 100 caterpillars per day. And the caterpillars, let's say that they're eating 1,000 leaves per day. I'm not sure that that's right, but we'll give it a go. Okay, so we're looking at bioaccumulation, and we're looking at biomagnification. Now, something else that we've got to consider for our organisms here is how long they live. Okay, so say the oak tree, its leaves, say they last 6 months because they're replaced every season. Then the caterpillars, they're probably only going to live for maybe 2 months, maybe. The blue tits might live, let's say, 2 years. And the sparrowhawk, if he's lucky, might live 5 years. Okay, this is just a made-up example. I don't have real data here. It's probably less than 5 years. Okay. Now, what happens if there's, let's say there's a contamination problem in the area and there's mercury in the soil. So each of these leaves contains make this a bit thicker again. Let's go for the highlighter, it's better. So each of the leaves contains, say, 3 units. Not sure that that's working very well. Go for the pen again, we'll go for a thick pen. Okay, so 3 units of a mercury compound, because it's never actually just mercury. Okay, and 3 units of mercury compound means that they're okay, they still live, but they've got some toxin, some pollutant inside of them. Now, the caterpillar is eating lots of the leaves. So instead of 3 units, let's say it's got 30 units inside its body. At this point, they still live. Maybe their ability to function is decreased, but they're still alive. Now, the blue tit, we're moving up the food chain here, the blue tit is eating lots of these caterpillars, lots of these 30 units. And because it lives for a long time, or relatively in this case, we get what's called bioaccumulation. So those units of mercury are piling up. They're increasing inside the blue tit over its lifetime. And this is called bioaccumulation. And the same happens for the sparrowhawk as well, because that lives even longer. It also suffers from bioaccumulation because the toxins, the mercury, is building up in its body over time. But it's also got this accumulative process whereby the problem of the mercury now is much bigger. It's a much bigger problem. And that's because of biomagnification. As we've gone up the food chain, we've got a much bigger problem. Trying to make this impactful. So it's getting bigger and bigger as we go up this food chain. And that's biomagnification. Okay, so we've got bioaccumulation within the lifetime, and we've got biomagnification along the food chain. Okay, and this as well is due to the second law. Remember the second law of thermodynamics. Okay, so we've covered a lot of information in that small amount of time here. I can make it go smaller for us. So we started off with our food chain, and we've gone on a journey demonstrating how we can illustrate food chains graphically. We've looked at the laws of thermodynamics, and we've finished off by looking at bioaccumulation and biomagnification. And I hope that was helpful. It's half an hour of information.